So next week, Disney Plus is bringing us our latest Star Wars show. It's Ahsoka. It's based on Ahsoka Tano, who is a character from the Clone Wars TV show. We now get to see her in live action. I'm really, really excited about this. And the trailer makes the show look fantastic. I had a couple of questions though, because it brings in this new character called Admiral Thrawn. And Ahsoka's very serious. And she's like, Thrawn has returned as the heir to the Empire. And I'm like, wow, who is Admiral Thrawn? And that's really where, as a Star Wars fan, you fall into one of two camps. If you're a Star Wars fan who's like really passionate about Star Wars, you read all the books, you read all the comics, you play all the video games, you know everything about it, you're like, yes, Admiral Thrawn is coming into live action Star Wars. Whereas if you're like me, and you're more of a casual Star Wars fan, you like the movies, you like the shows on Disney Plus, but you don't necessarily like devour all the books, you're like, who is Admiral Thrawn? And I thought it'd be a really interesting idea if we got somebody who is a die-hard Star Wars fan who knows everything about it to explain to me, the filthy casual, who Admiral Thrawn is. And there is nobody better suited to that job than my friend Thomas Felix Crichton, better known as Fleming Never Dies on Instagram. He is a real Star Wars fan, and he agreed to chat to me for about 30 minutes over Google Meet about who Admiral Thrawn is and why we should be getting excited about it. So I'm about to share our little conversation with you. I should warn you that my internet was very, very funky that day. So it's not the best quality video, and I had to trim some of the awkward silences, but I still think it's a really fascinating discussion. And Thomas always brings like primo wisdom and information and knowledge and enthusiasm and passion about Star Wars to any chat we have. So I really hope you enjoyed this chat, and yeah, let us know in the comment section down below, because you'll be seeing more of Thomas quite soon. Anyway, enjoy. And this is the signal that we're live. I am here with Thomas Felix Crichton, the man, the legend, Fleming Never Dies, and also a secret Star, not so secret. Look at you, you're in Star Wars uniform.
I'm truly out. I'm truly out as a Star Wars fan. Hello, how are you?
I am very well. It is so delightful to speak to you again. First of all, this is great. You got the Han Solo shirt and waistcoat, but it looks like an Imperial cap. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, an Imperial cap, and yeah, just to start us off on strong. Yeah, this is a Tusken Raider head. So I've got all the stuff around me as I realized video is a visual medium.
Yeah, my middle child is getting a Commander Cody helmet today.
Oh wow! Okay.
I'll have to post some pictures of that. But thank you. I'm so excited that you agreed to speak to me, because a lot of us love all the Star Wars stuff that's going on. We watched Obi-Wan Kenobi and things, and then we've got these exciting trailers for Ahsoka. Yeah, and there are die-hard fans like you, and there are filthy casuals like me. It's like, I have to admit, I watched the trailer for Ahsoka and I was kind of stoked for it. And I know who Ahsoka is because I watched the Clone Wars, but I don't know who Thrawn is. And there's this big thing of like, Thrawn is returning. And I'm like, wow, who's Thrawn? And then this blue guy with red eyes turned up. And I'm like, maybe we need a masterclass in who Thrawn is from an expert. So people like me who are kind of like Star Wars fans, but not super into Star Wars, can understand who he is.
Yeah, I mean, someone said to me that Star Wars is a very nice thing. You seem to have taken it a bit far. And so I can appreciate that.
Because there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I think to be aware of Thrawn, you'd have to. He was in that show Rebels, wasn't he?
Yeah, so Rebels is where I think the Disneyverse have recommended that you start, because that's their canon version of Thrawn.
Great. And then there are going to be a bunch of people who are pretending to be grown-ups like me who are like, oh, I'm not going to watch Rebels because it's a kids show, quote unquote. But Thrawn isn't just in Rebels.
Range of books. Yeah. So the origin of Thrawn is very much from Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire. And this is the origin of a huge amount of the Star Wars that we see today.
Now, we spoke about this before, about how the books kind of got kicked out of canon. Rebels is canon. So that's right. According to Disney, that's what actually happened. And then Heir to the Empire is like a legendary book, isn't it? Or a legendary book series.
That's right. In both sense of the word, because Disney now refers to the old expanded universe as Legends, but it is also legendary in terms of how it built what at one time was the most successful books program in the world, which was the Star Wars Expanded Universe. And this was the one that started it, Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire, which brought in Grand Admiral Thrawn as the new antagonist for Star Wars.
And when was that published?
1991. So, of course, Return of the
Not
Jedi had come out in 1983. There'd been that long, dry spell of nothing. Bond fans think they have it bad. Star Wars has been here before. We'd had a few role-playing games. We'd had the Ewoks and Droids cartoons. We'd had Caravan of Courage, the TV movie for Ewoks. But there hadn't been like a huge amount for people to sink their teeth into. And so this best-selling book, Heir to the Empire, was it. It was the first new Star Wars thing in a long time. It was the first in a trilogy by Timothy Zahn, who was already a very, very well-renowned novelist, sci-fi novelist. But these three books kick-started really the modern Star Wars era.
And this was before the prequels and everything. We were in a desert back then, weren't we?
Absolutely, and in many ways, the success of these books kind of led to, say, Shadows of the Empire, led to maybe the Star Wars Special Editions, because they really demonstrated that fans were still out there, and you could still put out new quality stuff.
So I watched the trailer, and Ahsoka mentioned, well, she described Thrawn as he's coming back as heir to the Empire. And so what does that mean?
So the character is deliberately citing the title of this novel, and it's very much, I hesitate to use the word fan baiting, but it is very much pushing out there for fans that, yeah, it is the Grand Admiral Thrawn from that book. It's a very deliberate nod because, of course, I say this was the most successful books program in the world until Disney took it over and said, no, that's real anymore. And it brought it from consistent, New York Times best-selling, fiction to a books program worth perhaps a tenth of that. Obviously, it's always difficult to know what figures are real with books and circulation figures and so on, but it's thought to be that the average book is worth about 1/10 of what they used to be in terms of sales. The only thing that really bucks that trend are anything by Timothy Zahn, and it usually has Grand Admiral Thrawn as the antagonist.
That's interesting. So, how far after, like, Return of the Jedi was Heir to the Empire set?
So it's set 5 years after.
Which is around the time, like, the show Boba Fett and The Mandalorian is set, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all set around the same time. And this was a wholly original idea. And as I say, because this was so successful, then you started to have comic book versions of Star Wars that were, let's say, sensible. Because when the original Star Wars film came out, you had the Marvel comics, which had Jackson, the 6-foot-tall green rabbit and stuff like that. Whereas the idea of actually having proper stories, like the kind of guys who do Judge Dredd, came out.
Yes. Oh, I love Judge Dredd.
So then Dark Empire becomes it. So basically, 1 year, Luke Skywalker needs to go against Grand Admiral Thrawn. The next year, he goes against the villains in this one.
That's crazy. So for us, well, for people like me who are filthy casuals, we got to see Luke again in The Mandalorian, where he's on his little planet and he's building the temples. And I think he's hanging out with Ahsoka, and then he borrowed Grogu for a bit. So is that where Luke is at about this time?
Roughly. So Luke is kind of after Return of the Jedi in the old expanded universe. He's going on his little adventures trying to find out what is his Jedi heritage, because so much has been purged. Having lived in China 6 years, it reminds me of, say, the Cultural Revolution, where you have to do some serious work to find out the ancient stuff. So that's what Luke's trying to do. He's trying to find, say, people who might be able to help him. He's trying to find records. Ultimately, after these two key adventures, we have the Jedi Academy trilogy, in which the clue is in the title. He creates a Jedi Academy.
And what is happening to the Empire at this point? So the Death Star 2 got destroyed, and the Empire, I mean, from the Mandalorian, we saw like it's fractured into different groups, but they're starting to communicate and maybe rebuild.
Yeah. And that's very echoey of the old universe. So as I say, when Disney came in, they said all of this is no longer true. They created their own things at 20 years after. But gradually with the TV shows, it seems they're pulling on more and more and more of the old ideas. For example, just to touch on the Disney trilogy, one of the ideas they said when they took over was ridiculous was the idea in this comic book, which was the most successful comic book. And it's one where the Emperor comes back. Which was, of course, the plot of The Rise of Skywalker. So they are pulling in more and more threads for the expanded universe. And yeah, so in these books, the Empire has lost its central point. but all the different kind of regional heads have carried on. Kind of, it's known as the Warlord era, really, before Thrawn tries to reunite them.
That's interesting. So who was Thrawn before the decline of the Empire? Who is he? Where does he come from? How come he's blue? Because most people in the Empire are like white guys with British accents.
Yes, and that's a mark of how amazing Thrawn was, that they were able to recognize his ability and put him up to be a Grand Admiral. And then he was, due to internal politics, sent to the unknown regions to explore there. So he was kind of a weird alien admiral that they came across, couldn't quite beat, so they recruited. It has a hint of the Gurkhas for the British. We tried to beat them twice, couldn't, so we recruited them.
Oh. And they're like the most fearless soldiers in the British Army.
Absolutely. So that is Thrawn, but he's not just a brute, and he's not just a military commander. He's a brilliant military commander, but also a brilliant strategist, but also has an appreciation of art, and he will study a species' art, and from that gain psychological insight, which will give him, for example, insight into where they are risk averse, where they are comfortable with 3 or 4 dimensions, all kinds of unique, strange aspects he'll gain just from looking at their art.
I saw a clip from Rebels, because I haven't really watched Rebels, but it's where he's talking about how you have to study and race's art to be able to understand them, which is kind of cool. It's almost like a Bond villain type thing.
Yes. So he is a genius, but that's always interesting because as a novelist, you can very easily write the words, he is a genius. But then how do you show it? How do you actually do that? And Timothy Zahn just had a really good knack of setting up, here's the rules of the universe, here's what you can do within them, here's how you can play. And the way that Grand Admiral Thrawn would play the game was genuinely better than the heroes. Without making the heroes look stupid, he was able to make the villain look super intelligent.
And I guess he survived the decline of the Empire and the collapse of the Empire because he was sent off somewhere, you said, because of politics.
That's right. So he lost out on some political saga, which seemed devastating at the time, but meant that he was in the unknown regions during this. So one of the questions is, gosh, if he'd been at the Battle of Endor, could the Empire have actually won?
Ooh, now, do you think they could have won?
Oh, I think fate had its fate and destiny, you know, it was going to happen. But it is interesting because he sets out the Empire. He wants to bring back the Empire, but he also wants to bring back the good bits, not the bad bits. And he's very specific about that. So, for example, there's somebody under him in a very early scene in the novel. Somebody under him makes a mistake, and everyone kind of freezes because, of course, with Darth Vader, well, Darth Vader would come along and strangle the guy. A lot of other guys would have taken him away. So that's the image we have of the Empire. Whereas Thrawn comes along, talks to the guy, and works out that actually the guy didn't just freeze up. He saw a new situation he'd never seen before. He tried to deal with it. It wasn't successful. He was asked, what would you do next time? He comes out with a good answer, and Thrawn really appreciates that and says, actually, that's innovative, and actually kind of rewards that, and it turns it into a lesson for everybody in a speech. And the people around him realize this is a totally different empire.
Now that's so interesting because one of the things that we were getting from like season 3 of The Mandalorian is that, and from Obi-Wan Kenobi as well, was that there are people out there who missed the Empire, who liked the Order. There was that scene in Obi-Wan Kenobi where they were in the back of the truck and the truck driver was going on about, oh, you know, at least there was law and order and stuff, which is kind of interesting when you look at like American politics. There are people who support Trump, for example, because they see him as a strong leader, and you know, people might hate that, but there are a group of people who support him, and I guess there is sentiment, pro-Empire sentiment across the galaxy.
And that's something really drawn from the novels, which I'm glad to see that Disney in their shows have kind of fronted that a bit more and shown it a bit more. George Lucas has always had it, and he's always been very keen to point out that, you know, when Star Wars Episode 1 came out, and there's the Chancellor who's mired in baseless scandal, and lots of people said that's Bill Clinton. And he said, well, most of this was written decades ago, and it was kind of initially based on the Romans and the decline of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. And it was based on that kind of turning point in history. So he said, it's basically that we just don't change very much as human beings. Like whatever technology is around us, we don't change.
That's fascinating because I watched Andor and it made me think of like the French Resistance. And there was so much of how, you know, they created the resistance cell almost the way that the French resistance would create the cells against the Nazis. So that is history repeating itself. And wasn't there a line that George Lucas said? It's like poetry or something.
Like poetry,
you nailed
it
it last
rhymes.
time. That so you mentioned that Thrawn, you know, he likes the good parts of the Empire. If he came back hypothetically and recreated the Empire, could it be a benevolent thing?
I've always wondered if, say the center of the galaxy where you have Coruscant, which, by the way, Coruscant is not a George Lucas word. George Lucas has used it in his films, but it was Heir to the Empire, the novel, which gave us the word for the first time. So this is something that's from the old books. It's been taken into the movies.
Oh.
It's been called all kinds of other things in initial drafts. But yeah, we have the idea that the Republic is brilliant for those central, but we see it in Star Wars Episode 1, right? The one many people would say is the kid film, that the Republic in the center of the galaxy is wealthy, it's prosperous, but then you've got Tatooine where there's literally slavery. It doesn't extend that far out. In those areas, it seems that the Empire is able to do something.
That's interesting. And I mean, yeah, everyone goes on about the Phantom Menace being a kid's film, but there's quite a lot of, there's the whole thing of, oh, look, Naboo, one of the worlds where what a senator comes from, has been taken over by the Trade Empire. And back in Coruscant, they're like, well, we'll put together a committee. And it is almost like real politics. And it's like how frustrating that must be.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I really like this. Obviously, it should be light. It should be kind of easy to read. But then you do have those undercurrents, and that's what really makes it interesting. That you can almost read it at your level.
Okay, so Thrawn's is Thrawn returning? We can watch Ahsoka, and I guess we know he's returning because we've seen him in the trailer. But what does that mean?
Hopefully, it means a cracking good show, because when you've got a really strong antagonist, it brings out the best of the protagonist. There's a reason I love the Man with the Golden Gun.
Yes. Oh, and of course you got another Star Wars alumni there, haven't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, as I say, a lot of fans really love this idea of Thrawn coming back. We hope to see him done well, and that's always the caveat. If it's done well, we accept it. If it's not done well, we still have our old books. Thank you very much. It is interesting because the books are very complete, if that makes sense. There's a very coherent, satisfying narrative, a very coherent story. Does this fit into it? Is it going to overwrite it? Rebels fit in with the old story. How this new Ahsoka show is going to do that, I don't know.
I was wondering about that because you said, is there a lot of stuff that's already been created by Disney that contradicts other things, or will they be able to like lift that story and put it in there?
It depends. So for the Disney trilogy of films, that completely overwrites a huge amount. And that was an issue for a lot of people. Disney has always argued that in some ways it was a straitjacket. Trying to tell a story within the confines of the expanded universe was always going to be difficult, because how do you break out of that? In fact, what we have seen is that Dave Filoni, who is largely responsible for a lot of the TV shows, along with Jon Favreau, has actually been able to do that very well. We've also seen the video games do it extremely well within those constraints. So it is a question of whether this new TV show will overwrite or create some kind of new story. For the most part, the cinematic Star Wars, apart from that trilogy, have done pretty well, actually bringing back a lot of expanded universe ideas.
So the whole idea of Thrawn being like a more human, well, not more human because he's an alien, obviously, but a better leader and looking up. Yes. But the fact that he seems like more benevolent than Darth Vader and the Emperor and stuff like that. How does that, he's trying to recreate the Empire. I guess the Alliance or the New Republic will be fighting against him. But it strikes me that maybe there's going to be a bit of moral conflict of like who's in the right. Because we've already seen in The Mandalorian that there are aspects of the New Republic that are failing, like they're with that border world and the Mandalorian gang who were in trouble, and the New Republic wouldn't send anyone to go and help. And it's kind of those same flaws that were in the original Republic are being repeated. So is there going to be a clash where some of our heroes are faced with like having to make difficult choices to be in the right? I mean, it's not as black and white as the Empire seems.
Yeah, I hope so. And a huge part of Star Wars has always been morality tales, something you can discuss with kids about this is what's right and wrong. And it's always had the potential to go into grayer areas. And I think Rogue One is a good example of that, where you have Saw Gerrera, who is a terrorist. He's not a freedom fighter, but they do play around with that in ways that I find are really interesting. You've seen the Clone Wars where you have the young, idealistic, hopeful Saw Gerrera, and we see the beginning of his kind of turn into darkness. And that idea of bad people becoming good and good people becoming bad is also a very important part of Star Wars.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the amazing things. Oh, did I tell you I took my son to Comic Con and he got his picture taken with Hayden Christensen?
Oh wow! Oh wow! No.
But I mean, you look at Anakin. It's like Anakin is such a good character, and then he becomes such an intrinsically evil character.
Absolutely, and he kind of loses his humanity, and perhaps part of that gets into why the book was so interesting, because of course for Darth Vader he's strides on screen, he's what 6'4", he's all in black, he's got his scary mask, he's got the operatic music, he's the bad guy. When you're writing a novel, it's quite difficult to say, and he was 6'5", and he wore a black cape, and loud music played as he came. It's not so compelling. So you need something more cerebral. You need something with a bit more depth. And I say that's what Zahn was able to really add in to his book. And I think the fact that they're willing to try and put some of that onto screen, I say it adds depth, which I think is good for Star Wars.
Now, the main protagonists of that series, aren't they like our core Star Wars folks of Luke and Han and Leia and things?
Yeah, that's right. So it's only 5 years after Return of the Jedi. So we've seen their character arc as Luke goes from farm boy to Jedi Knight. We've seen Han Solo go from smuggler to Mr. Respectable General. We've seen Princess Leia not change a huge amount, actually, because she was always a kick-ass leader, and she became a kick-ass leader at the end, but with slightly softer edges. So then we have this new thing where the leaders of who are the rebels are now the responsible ones, and that's really interesting. Actually, he puts a huge amount on Leia. Of course, she is following Mon Mothma's lead, who is portrayed in Andor, but she has to deal now with the responsibility of government. And Han Solo can no longer just be some kind of smuggler and solve everything with a blaster or whatever. He now has to deal with trade negotiations. That doesn't necessarily play to Han Solo's strengths, and he has to wrestle with that.
That's so interesting. I kind of hated what they did with Han and Luke in the sequel trilogy, because they kind of like deconstructed them. Han went
they
back to being a
deconstructed them, and they
but
put
I
them
guess
kind of
that's
back
not
to
what
where
happened.
they were at the beginning of the first film. So that was always deeply unsatisfying to a lot of us. Luke has to go from, nobody really taught him. He spends a limited amount of time with Obi-Wan Kenobi, a limited amount of time with Yoda. Now he's the galaxy's only Jedi Knight to his knowledge and to anyone's knowledge. So he needs to reconstruct the whole Jedi Order without really knowing what he's supposed to do himself. And that's really what the Jedi Academy trilogy is about, which you can explore in comics, in books, in video games, in a whole range of media, which really show his initial struggles with. Now he needs to be a master. Now he needs to find the people, find out what to teach them, and build something new. And that's always the exciting bit of that kind of the early times after Return of the Jedi that they have to build.
I really liked that, seeing Luke again in The Mandalorian, and I thought they did that really well. And the way they like brought him to life on screen, it actually was I could believe it and buy it. But
Yes,
I guess
absolutely.
they won't be able to focus on those three core characters in Ahsoka. So maybe, do you think they're going to like transmute the storyline and make Ahsoka the stand-in for our original trio?
That's kind of my guess. So if they do disregard a lot of those plot lines, then it would just be a rework of it, brand new storylines, disregarding what happened to Thrawn and all that stuff. It will be their own storyline with Ahsoka, who has earned quite a bit in the Star Wars universe over the years. But I am concerned that will throw out kind of the original three guys, because what can they do? How can they use them?
And what is Thrawn's plan? He's back, and he's just like, I'm back, baby.
Yeah, so he builds alliances and he conquers planets and he gathers support behind him. He's actually very, very good at that in terms of his politics, actually quite solid. So basically, he wants to bring back the law and order that everyone misses.
Yeah. And how successful is he in the books? I guess, do we need to worry about spoilers? I guess we don't, because the books exist and the books have stories, and we can talk about what happens in the books, but that isn't necessarily what's going to happen in the show.
Oh, absolutely not. So no, I wouldn't take the books as the show. They're not going to adapt them directly. I'm only being slightly cautious in how I talk about them. I know they're printed in 1991 and a few years after for the two sequels. But I'm just being slightly cautious in case someone wants to have the joy of discovering them for the first time and maybe they're watching this video first. I would definitely say this is a fantastic place to start a kind of a Star Wars fandom. So his plan is very simply that, to expose the weaknesses of the heroes who do have weaknesses. They're not, they're not incapable, but equally they haven't run a galaxy before.
And that is a challenge. I mean, that was also again looking at like real life history, the reconstruction of Europe after World War II and after the fall of Nazism and stuff.
Yeah.
And it is, I guess, the case of a lot of people who aren't necessarily born to be leaders, or they have generals who go in and become leaders. I mean, Charles de Gaulle became the ruler of France. Dwight Eisenhower became the ruler of America, and it's kind of like interesting to see the historical mirroring in the book.
Sure. Star Wars has always had kind of historical allegories throughout it. I'd say maybe more historical inspiration rather than direct allegories, because I don't think you're supposed to watch Star Wars and think that guy's supposed to be this person from history or something. But Lucas has a good awareness of history, a very good awareness. And so you do see inspirations and pulls and so on. And of course, the expanded universe was filled with many, many great writers who each drew from a different aspect of history.
That's fascinating. Okay, so you know what? I think we should wrap this up because our internet connection is not great. So hopefully it's all going to work out. But I want to know what you are most looking forward to and hope gets like carried over from the books into the TV show.
Ooh, you know what? I do like the character Talon Card, who is a information broker and is a very unusual character in Star Wars. He makes a living just off what he knows, but he always knows something. But I think he's a really unique character. It's one of Timothy Zahn's favorite characters to write. And so I'd really like to see him. I hope to see Luke in a good light if we have him. And I'm interested to see what Dave Filoni pulls in, because Filoni, every episode is written by Dave Filoni. He's responsible for the Clone Wars and responsible for so much of fairly recent Star Wars. He has a particular knack, which I think he especially came out with the TV show Rebels, the 4 seasons, where he might plant a seed in one episode. You'd see something slightly curious. You wouldn't find out what it is for years. So I'm hoping that in the latest one, we might find something that we can refer back to years before, and we're like, oh, I always wondered what that was going to lead to.
I love stuff like that. I was going to say, I had this crazy idea that maybe anyone's listening. You know how we used to do the Bond book club? Maybe before Ahsoka comes out, we ought to like have a book club for the Heir to the Empire trilogy. Maybe you'd be down for doing that with me.
Oh, maybe I would. Yes.
So that's excellent. Well, let's give that some thought, because that actually sounds like something that could be super fun.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to do that.
Well, brilliant. My internet is now really like steam is practically coming out of my computer. So I will wrap this up and stop recording. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak, Thomas. It's always a pleasure speaking to you, and it's really cool. Like, I now am more soaked and excited about Ahsoka based off what you've told me. So that's exciting to me, and hopefully other people who are filthy casuals like me are gonna be into it. So this will not be the last time that we speak. And this book club idea might be quite fun. So I'm going to stop recording now, but thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you so much to Thomas for being a part of that, for agreeing to chat to me and explain who Thrawn was. I don't know about you, but I'm super excited now to see Thrawn appear in the live action Ahsoka show. If you are too, let us know in the comment section down below, and I'll be back very soon with another video. Until then, ciao. I'm Roland Hume. I've sold 67,000 copies of my books. If you want to find out how I did it, I've got the link right here you can click. And otherwise, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more videos coming soon. Thank you.